President Bruess assumes the role at both an exciting time and a challenging one. And at the time of this interview, he's just getting started as his first week of the 2022 academic year began on Monday. So naturally, as classes are in session and the president needs to be on campus, we are recording this session on the campus of St. John's in the recording studio of the Dietrich Reinhardt Learning Commons. President Bruess, it's good to see you. Welcome to your first academic year as the joint president of CSB+SJU, and thanks for taking the time during a pretty chaotic week to chat with us.
Andrew, thanks for having me. This is exciting, and it's of course an exciting time of year with students coming back and classes started. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And so a lot of people are just starting to familiarize themselves with you. Can you give us a little bit of background on your personal history? Let's talk about your ties to higher education and what draws you both to the profession as a college/university president, but particularly to St. Ben's and St. John's.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it probably began in my childhood as the one of 4 kids in a family of educators. Both my parents were in high school education. My dad was a teacher, coach, athletic director. My mom was a teacher's aide and attendance secretary. She for over 40 years and my dad for over 30. So there's a lot of Bruess in that Monroe High School. But from there, I went to St. Norbert College, where I got my bachelor's degree in sociology and psych. And then I got inspired by a vice president, dean of students, who invited me to think about higher education. And then went to Ohio University, where I got my master's, my doctorate. And at the same time I was doing that, my wife, Carol, where we met at St. Norbert College, went and got her master's and PhD in interpersonal communication. And she's now holds the distinction of being the youngest faculty member to ever receive faculty emeritus status from the University of St. Thomas. But she's now ambassador #1 for St. Ben's, St. John's, and of course me in the role of president. It's exciting to be here. After grad school, went to St. Catherine for 22 years, and then was the president, most recently the president of St. Norbert College. And I think for us, there's a attraction to higher education that really has become vocational in nature. We're really called to this enterprise of higher education, and really particularly pleased to be at St. Ben's, St. John's. It was a bit of a surprise of a vocational term for us to get here.
Right.
But that was kind of how we got here. It was a fun journey, but today I think one could easily say that what attracted us to St. Ben's and St. John's is these incredible reputations, 2 schools that I competed against for over 20 years. And that and what I would describe as the timeless values, the Benedictine values of these 2 places are incredible. And of course I've learned even more so in the last couple of months, this unbelievable Johnny Benny commitment that the graduates have. It's just incredible, the outcomes we're producing, but the love that Johnny graduates and Benny graduates have for these 2 places, it's just incredible.
There's a lot in there, I think, that plays into higher education as it stands today. St. Ben's and St. John's can emulate, or are emulated by a lot of other institutions across the country. You mentioned that you were competing with them for many, many years at St. Norbert's, and obviously St. Catherine and St. Ben's have many ties as well as they do to St. John's. But higher education is changing, as you know.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the future of higher education. What do you believe is its purpose to both students and those who are leading institutions and teaching the courses? What is the evolving role of higher education as our society as a whole kind of shifts and molds with time too? Because what St. Ben's and St. John's looked like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and where it's headed in the next 10, 20, 30 years is certainly a lot different.
Yeah. Boy, there's a lot in that question.
I would start big. We'll start big and then we'll get down.
Yeah, let me first response is about the evolution of higher education in the last 40, 50 years. We've seen a change from a public good, higher education for the betterment of society, for economic flourishing, for better citizenry, to higher education now perceived more as a commodity. And I think that big trend that has been evolving for the last 40 years or so has been accelerating. So in that evolution, I think rests the answer to the question. At St. Ben's, St. John's, of course, we believe that education is about human flourishing. It's about helping young individuals become the next generation of citizens. It's sure we want them to have jobs. And we're very proud that St. Ben and St. John's are number 1 and 2 in the state in job placement. But more importantly, our belief, and my personal belief, is that education is a public good. It's essential. We know the unbelievable benefits that come from education. We know that some college is better than no college, and we know that a 4-year private liberal arts education in this tradition produces some remarkable outcomes. So high level, I would say we need to remind ourselves and the public that what higher education is about human flourishing first, about communities flourishing, and the betterment of society. And to really push back against the commodity notion that it's a privilege and it's a public good, what we do in higher education. And I think we have to remind the public of that. And that's what gives what we do such breadth and such depth and such purpose. And I think that needs to be a focus for us, particularly now, at this time in society and the history of American higher education.
When I think about St. Ben's and St. John's and what you just said, I think about greatness in the agency of community and greatness in the agency of others, and how important that is to the Benedictine rule and how St. Ben's and St. John's has been operating for 170 plus years. And there are parts of it that certainly need to be preserved, and parts of it that are so inherently true to creating good, holistic, successful human beings that are Bennies and Johnnies. But there is a balance between preservation and progress, no doubt. So how can we identify what makes these institutions great and ensure that it lives on, while understanding that with time, again, comes change? And what does that look like, and how is that done well? Because you talked about the changes that have happened up to this point, and there are certainly things that are inherent to St. Ben's and St. John's that create fantastic leaders, as you can find anywhere across the world. Yeah. But there is this element of progress that comes along too, as is seen right here with you and being the first joint president of St. Ben's and St. John's.
Yeah, great question. I think the language of preservation and progress is an interesting juxtaposition of terms. There's a phrase that you hear at St. Ben's and St. John's of protect, preserve, and promote. Okay. I always hesitate when I hear the language of preservation, because it can push people into a sense of complacency and comfort. So I like to use a little bit different approach to the language. Take these great traditions. We don't want to protect them. We want to amplify them. We want to make more of them. And that hopefully means evolving them, not protecting and preserving. It's more of a deficit model in my mind. So I like to think of these mission traditions in contemporary ways. We're special and we're relevant to American higher education, not because we're Catholic or Benedictine or liberal arts, or that we're residential, or that we work hard on the empowerment of women and the development of men. We're relevant because we're all those things. And in order to amplify that and to make that more well-established and more known and more accessible to more Johnnies and Bennies, we have to amplify it. And in doing that, we ensure its existence for decades, So I like to think from that sort of appreciative inquiry point of view, or more of an abundance model of this great set of assets are not ours to hold and keep. They're ours to liberate and to amplify and extend. And so I think a very important part of a healthy St. John's, St. Ben's going forward is committing ourselves to constantly working to understand the increasingly more sophisticated ways who we are. What does it mean to be Catholic and Benedictine today? What does it mean to be a liberal arts institution today? And how is that different than what we've known for 40, 50, 150 years? And how does it match or even anticipate what society is looking for? So in there, I think, rests the secret to how we position ourselves for the future, is how do we stay committed to these great traditions, but open them up, amplify them, and accept the fact that in the understanding, the increasingly more sophisticated understanding of who we are, we then position ourselves to make that more accessible to people and to make it more, to help ensure that it's permeating the student experience.
I love that, the commitment to it and the fluidity that it kind of means as society progresses, and the fluidity of things that are so inherently true and inherently good that these universities amplify. And that kind of segues perfectly into the next question that I have for you, and a subject that I want to talk about in strong integration. first of all, I think it's going to be really important that we define that a little bit for our listeners, but I also think that it's important for our listeners to understand, what does that mean to different stakeholders? You described it on the kind of why level, the why of strong integration for St. John's. Now let's go to the what, which is alumni, students, staff, faculty, and friends. Why now, and why is strong integration important?
Right. Great question. I would start by saying the monastic sponsors and the corporate and the boards, the common boards, have established this as a strategy, a macro strategy. Strong integration to be more nimble, to be more adaptive, to be more responsive to the disruption we're facing. In that definition of strong integration is efficiency, nimbleness, being adaptive, responsive, and creating structures and processes and policies. And strong integration, those purposes, that definition is reason enough for strong integration. And that's what we're implementing. But it's my belief, and I think it's our collective work. In fact, your listeners should know that I'm hoping they can help define strong integration. I'm hoping that the alumni, students, faculty, staff, and our other constituents help us define this. Because I think we will have gotten the attention of American higher education when we can say that the real outcomes or purposes of strong integration are, in fact, much higher order than nimble, adaptive, responsive. Those are all important. But when we can deliver strong integration for improved student experience, for stronger outcomes, take these great outcomes we're already producing and ratchet them up a couple more notches. If we've got a half a dozen of the most important outcomes in the top 50 national liberal arts colleges, what if we were to get a dozen up there? What if it really makes something more than incremental change? So when we collectively define the will and the desire of the community for what strong integration is, I hope that it's defined by better outcomes, by a more compelling, sophisticated student experience. When we've done that, we will, of course, have done these other things about being nimble and responsive and more adaptive to the world we're in. Then I think we will have really accomplished something. So the purposes of strong integration will be made manifest when we have a more responsive, sophisticated student experience producing better outcomes.
So on the topic of outcomes, you're leading these two institutions, and you've been here for a short while, but you've been here now and you've had a chance to meet many of the members of our community. So as you've met current students, alumni, faculty, staff, the monastics, have you been able to put a finger on why St. Ben's and St. John's, from a people perspective, produce such disproportionately good leaders and holistically successful human beings? And I think a more important question is, how can we help each other ensure that that continues? And you're touching on that a little bit, but from a people perspective, why is that the case?
Right. Well, I alluded earlier when I said that it's that we're all these dimensions of who we are. We're Catholic, we're Benedictine, we're liberal arts, we're residential. I think the Benedictine values is maybe the biggest differentiator for us, and they're so timeless. But it's the way that we've integrated these constructs of identity into the student experience. And I think there's something compelling about the outcomes we're producing. When you talk with alumni, and you even talk with observers and friends that are not graduates, there's something, and probably every college president can say this at some level, there's something special about what we're producing. But the level of affinity, I call it the affinity factor, the connection that people have. We saw this at reunion weekend. I've seen it with these trustee receptions that we're having where we're meeting some of the community in really intense ways. I see it when new students come. I think it's a belief in what we do and a belief that we're doing it particularly well. And those institutions are producing the strongest outcomes. Part of what they've captured is the human experience. And how do we build relationships and communities that represent accurately who we say we are? So that alignment with articulated values and the experience, when that lines up, it's powerful. And I think our students are hungry for this kind of an education. They want a world that's more just. They want a world that's focused on the common good. They want right relationships with people, and they want to learn. And when you have a community given to those higher order principles and a particular way of being in community, it starts to kind of get a flywheel momentum.
Compound.
Yeah, it's compounding interest effect for sure. And that's what I'm seeing, that's what I'm hearing. And when we think about great educational practice, it's based on relationships, it's based on high levels of engagement, high levels of participation, a willingness to challenge students and then support them from a very developmental educational framework. This community is really good. The faculty and staff are really good at engaging students in high impact practices and really pressing them and then supporting them like crazy when they fail or when they make mistakes. And that kind of community is a very powerful tool educationally, and we see that play out in our outcomes.
For 25, I've been around the world of higher ed for probably an embarrassingly long amount of time.
Right.
And there are few places in the United States where I think the place and the people beget the connection that the groups have to that place. I'm thinking the Notre Dames of the world, and some of these and other brands, and they don't necessarily have to be universities, that create this affinity and this culture. And St. John's and St. Ben's, from my experience, and of course I'm biased, but it's definitely one of those places. Moving to some tangible things, innovation is a word that is, gosh, it's beaten, but it's an important thing to keep a finger on as we move into the future. And 2032 is going to look a lot different than 2022, even in terms of how a brand sits on the spectrum of higher education, and what tools, tangible tools, are we leveraging as universities to bring in more innovation and more people that are attracted to new and are attracted to the future. So what is St. Ben's and St. John's looking at in the next 10 years in terms of tangible innovation, programs, student groups, alumni network changes, technology, changing desires of students as it relates to seamless and personalized experiences, have digital elements, for example, in nearly all parts of their lives. So what things are St. Ben's and St. John's looking at in particular in this 10-year window, we'll stick within 10 years, that are related to that?
Yeah, boy, great question. Let me start with great brands and great organizations are also tending to the culture and the environment that they're creating to allow innovation to happen. So the first thing I'd say, we're not going to launch our strategic plan process till second semester. There's a readiness phase we're in right now, and that readiness phase is about working to create conditions for innovation to happen. So the first thing we need to do is to really cultivate a spirit of innovation, encourage people to take risks, to experiment, to try new things. My hope is that we can take this wonderful energy that we already have and things we're already innovating on and just 2, 3, 4x that in a short order of time to be more adaptive and to be more responsive. We're going to start where I kind of call the center. So center inside out innovation. A great example of that from a programmatic perspective is nursing. One of the things that is really impressive to have watched is that for decades, St. Ben's had the best nursing program in the state with NCLEX pass rates off the charts, really phenomenal. They took that great tradition and they built out a master's, now doctorate program in nursing. So what are the essential essence? What's the essence of the place, and how do we build from that position of strength? So we'll add some graduate programs. There'll be ones that we already have a strength in baccalaureate innovation that will play itself out. Things like perhaps a nurse anesthetist program, perhaps a master's in environmental science. Where are those things that we have expertise that we can play into a market need? So find our mission strength and how that resonates with the market need. That's an area I think of great importance. Certainly. There's all sorts of focus right now, right out of the gate, taking a look at the what I call the intersection of teaching and learning, the student experience, the intersection of the curricular and the co-curricular. We have some great outcomes by way of retention, graduation rates, student satisfaction, high levels of high impact practice. How well have we knitted that together? And how explicit is the signature experience for students? We have pre-pandemic, we had almost a 70% participation rate in study abroad. That's got to be top 50 liberal arts performance. How can we get back to that? And how do we, that high impact practice, how do we do more collaborative research with faculty and students? How do we do more engaged pedagogy? Your question of technology, we're not going to be an online provider of education, but we should have technology and the digital saturating the student experience. So how do we leverage technology and the digital in the co-curricular and curricular experience of students? And how do we create that experience that's driven by data, driven by evidence, and it's more responsive to the needs of students? Those will be some areas of focus. There'll be a lot of time and bandwidth spent on academic program development and making sure that our entire constellation of programs as a constellation are relevant, are impactful, and true to our liberal arts, Catholic tradition, Benedictine tradition. So you'll see a fair amount. We're going to be doing some campus master planning. We'll be doing that jointly. Instead of two separate plans, we'll be doing it together. There'll be a fair amount of innovation happening with how we establish next level philanthropy and fundraising. That's going to help drive some of this innovation. And right now we're really going strong investment in new, more contemporary ways of recruiting and retaining students, looking at a centralized marketing communication strategy that will help position our brand better. So on all these different dimensions. And my favorite one is finding ways to be more sophisticated and more consistent on how we discover who we are by way of identity and how we bring that to life and integrate it in the student experience.
I'll get to that because I think that's one of the hardest things to convey. As somebody was born practically in the Great Hall, it seems, that feeling has always been the hardest to convey. What does it mean to be a Benny and a Johnny, and how can we take that feeling and turn it into something that's tangible for a 17-year-old who's exploring a number of options. And I like the inside-out approach. Take what we're good at, take what's strong, look at the macro environment. You know, you mentioned nursing, you mentioned environmental science. Those are two things that are clearly growing in prominence if you're reading anything above the fold nowadays. Those are very, very important to be looking at. So I applaud the universities for doing that. I want to shift it to how we can help you, and when I mean we, I mean the alumni and the friends and everybody else that's associated to the universities. How can we ensure that we're bringing in the right men and women to St. Ben's and St. John's? And this goes back to this value proposition of St. Ben's and St. John's, and what does it mean to have an experience here, and what is our value proposition to the body of people that are looking at coming to these places. It's clearly hard to convey, so how can we help grow our voice and that value proposition in the near future?
Great question. And one of our points of strength and distinction is the strength of the alumni referral. It's off the charts. When you ask an auditorium of new students and parents, have those that have legacy family members that are graduates to stand up, it sometimes feels like half the room. So one thing we can do is leverage that strength, that history. We already do a great job with alumni telling the story. So I think we need to give our graduates more tools, more social media, more digital, more content to share, tell the story of our students, tell the story of these places. What makes it distinctive? What makes the experience so powerful? Let our best ambassadors tell that story. Other ways that really make a difference, engaging with students and alumni for mentoring, for internships, hiring them. You know, we're number 1 and 2 in the state for a reason, because our alumni network is making it happen. And how do we do that? How do we raise that to the next level? And of course, engaging in all the ways that alumni can. When we move, right now our fundraising is pretty spectacular. Last year we raised collectively almost $45 million, both organizations. Our outcomes, some of our outcomes are running neck and neck with schools that have billion-dollar endowments. We don't have a billion-dollar endowment. We're outpunting our coverage. How can we bring more friends into the fold and lift our gaze to higher expectations? We need to have a billion-plus endowment to drive more of the outcomes that we want to drive. How do we resource ourselves so that we can achieve these reasonable aspirations that we have? So the alumni are going to help us with that. Most importantly, what I need from alumni right now is their voice. Help us define strong integration. Help us identify those programs that you think the market needs. Help us find ways to connect our students with internships and placements and be a part of co-creating our future. We're so poised. The readiness for more engagement is, to me, really one of maybe the best assets we have. And how can we open that up, tell the story? It's a much more complicated story to tell today than it was 10, 15 years ago because students and families have a wider set of variables that they're considering. So when I say we're Catholic, we're Benedictine, and we're liberal arts and residential, and we focus on the empowerment of women and men, I say those things to you. In my mind, there's cascading from each of those traditions a whole narrative that builds the value proposition. But we can't use monikers any longer to recruit 17, 18-year-olds. We have to use outcomes. We have to use personal stories. We have to show them, get them on campus, let them experience the environment. So we have to move away from using monikers, and we have to move into what I call attribute-based marketing, communication, and storytelling.
I think that that's a really important case for St. Ben's and St. John's as we look forward. And it's funny, as we're wrapping this podcast up, the question that I always end up asking my guests for the last question is, what's next? And I don't know if that's a fair question to ask you, what's next, because clearly there's a lot next for you and for St. Ben's and St. John's. So I'm going to just change it a little bit, and then I do want to ask your score prediction for the football game on Saturday.
Oh, my.
But we'll get to what's next for
Might be the hardest question yet.
You're right, and don't answer it wrong. But let's talk about 10 years from now. If you can get St. John's and St. Ben's in 10 years, and you're looking at the last 10 years of work in 2032, where do you hope that we are as an institution?
I want to pick three landing spots. The first is going to be, we will be able to describe and show, and students will experience an educational experience, the curriculum, co-curriculum, that is more sophisticated and more powerful by way of producing outcomes in 3 years, and certainly 5 years, and even more so in 10 years. We have to do this fairly rapidly because of the disruption in the environment. The first thing that we'll be doing will be celebrating in 10 years, celebrating how well we've knitted that experience together. And in doing so, we've invested more at the intersection of teaching and learning. Students are more attracted to it. Our retention rates are up. Our graduation rates are further up, already first in class. We're 1 and 2 in the state with job placement. We're going to hold that position, but we're going to be known more regionally and more nationally for that. We're going to produce better first-year retention rates, better graduation rates. We're already remarkably low national loan default rates. At St. Ben's, it's less than 1%. At St. John's, it's 1.5%. It's already affordable. How can we make it more affordable? So the second thing after the student experience is radiating and really in strong position will be a financial equilibrium. We need to establish a sustainable financial equilibrium so we're able to invest in our faculty and staff. We're able to invest in more facilities. We're able to hold up a philanthropy record that represents top 50 liberal arts outcomes. And that sustainable financial equilibrium is going to require stable new enrollment, stable returning enrollment, new innovation, new graduate programs, increased philanthropy, and new partnerships generating new kinds of revenue for the institution for its purposes. And the third thing I'd hold up is we will have done such a good job systematically deepening our understanding of mission traditions, integrating those into the student experience, and living them, that and we'll do that unapologetically, but we will have done that in such a strong fashion over that 10 years that our mission will radiate. And by that I mean you can't help, when you meet a Johnny or a Benny or you're on campus, you can tell, you'll know what Benedictine means, you'll know what Catholic means, you'll know what liberal arts means, you know what the empowerment of women looks like, and you know what the development of principled men looks like, because we have so integrated those principles that it's going to simply speak for itself. It's going to literally radiate on our campuses. Those three things, if we have that kind of a quality of experience, if we establish a financial equilibrium, and we can proudly claim an integrated, radiated mission, those three things, I think, at a macro level, will drive us forward, and we'll be accomplishing things and claiming outcomes that right now we can't. And we'll be continuing to claim those that we already can, the ones that are already, up in that top tier, nationally speaking.
All right. What do you got for Saturday?
Saturday, first of all, I'm forecasting low to mid 70s, beautiful, a breeze, perfect football weather. And that's important because it's the first game of the season, and we're playing Whitewater. number 4 team in the country. I don't know a ton about these two teams because it's early in the season, but they're both really strong defensively. And it's too early in the season, even with great coaching and great programs, especially at St. John's, to be running up the score. I think it's too early for a big, high-scoring game. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to see a game. We'll have some scoring because the weather conditions are right, but it's going to be primarily a defensive battle. And I think we're going to see a close game, and it's going to be won by a field goal in the last 30 seconds. And I'm looking at a 24-21, 17-14 kind of game. So I'm going to call the Johnnies with the win, 24-21, Saturday afternoon.
I like it. I like it. Good choice.
If I don't know, if you were to kind of go the odds maker, I don't know what they'd say about that prediction, but I'm feeling it.
I'm about as biased as a Johnny football fan as it gets.
Have we ever beat them in Collegeville? Have we ever played them in Collegeville? This is something
it was probably between 2003 and 2007. A little bit too young for me. But if we did play them in Collegeville, I almost guarantee you that I was there.
Okay, so I'm going to go with this. I'm going to say early in the season, not a high offense, strong defense, home crowd advantage. It's going to be an overwhelmingly joyous occasion at the end of Saturday. We're going to win 24-21.
I love it. I love it. All right, President Bruess, thank you for your time. I think St. Ben's and St. John's are in great hands. I'm leaving this conversation very inspired. I hope that those that are listening to this episode, our alums in particular, are inspired as well and eager to find ways to help and engage in the future of St. Ben's and St. John's, because these are great places and we need to ensure that they're here for many years to come for our students. Thank you.
Andrew, great to meet you. Good to be with you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care.